Like so many Americans who grew up in classical music in the post-war years, my earliest resonant memory of Shostakovich is the Symphony No. 5. Symphony No. 5, this is a very grave and serious work. To have that as one's basic reflection of Shostakovich, and then to come to this, to come to Moscow Cheryomushki, which is a total about-face. It could not be more different from Symphony No. 5, but it is absolutely cut from the same cloth.
I think the show is, in a way, it's like this crazy combination of a kind of Hollywood rom-com and this sort of big Broadway book musical, and it's all about trying to find love and trying to find housing. Basically, the idea is it's late 50s Moscow. It's in a time in the city when people are really tight on housing and you have to have a permit to live in an apartment. Most people live in shared communal housing, like multiple families to one apartment. And you know, I'm in my late 20s. Most of the company that we're working with is sort of fortuitously also in their late 20s, early 30s. And you know, I think those questions of how do I attach to another person, how do I find a connection, how do I find love, and how do I balance that with, you know, where I'm supposed to live and where my life is taking me. And it's about a bunch of young people trying to do that.
I love chamber orchestra versions of great works because they literally bring out a different aspect of the score that you wouldn't nearly so much experience in the original large-scale version. Instead of hearing a grand Soviet opera orchestra, imagine now that grandiose orchestra being reduced to just a little band in a cheap Moscow cafe in the late 1950s, and you're hearing this darker, satirical side that was always there in the original, but you didn't experience it, you didn't notice it nearly as much. Shostakovich rejoiced in satire, but he could only go so far, even in the relatively liberal days of the Khrushchev regime.
I think there's a real fear with this piece. There was on our part for a very long time that it's going to feel like this late 50s Soviet comedy, and that all the archetypes are Soviet comedic archetypes and not people that we can easily access. And I think one of the things that we really attached to was this idea that in the piece there is this incredibly youthful, hopeful belief that if we just commit to the group and we as a group collectively will the thing into being, that we can make a change. And I think that's sort of an inherently American kind of optimism as well.
What's been fascinating about this for me is that my musical view of the work, my interpretation of the work has changed dramatically after seeing the staging rehearsals. But I honestly can't remember a production in which it happened so much as it does here. Because of course there's so much spoken dialogue, so that how I and the cast approach the music is so strongly influenced as to how the singers as actors approach it as text.
For me and the choreographer Eric, it took such close communication about exactly what every single moment, every single beat of the piece was, so that we were in harmony about what story we're telling and what pictures we're creating and what the feel of the world is, the tone of it, so that we can work in separate rooms and be able to trust one another. And our company is so good, and they're so quick to figure out what the piece is, that we can actually work off of them, and they make our work much better because they're able to breathe life and fill it instead of us having to like paint it.
What will an audience take away from this piece? I think ultimately a joy of living. And we have to always remember with this work that yes, absolutely, it's satire on the Soviet Union of the time, satire of the Soviet system, but we also cannot forget that in this era of the 1950s, when you think of what Russians had been through in the 20s and 30s and 40s, this was a Cheryomushki, this was a magic garden, this was a heaven on earth. So we are all exulting in the spirit of satire, but there's also a spirit of youth and of joy, which I think is even more infectious.